Today we have a very, very special guest. Uh, David Harris needs no introduction. He's a former CEO of the American Jewish Committee, the man single-handedly responsible to make the American Jewish Committee what it is today. Around the world, he is known as the roving foreign minister of the State of Israel. In my opinion, with all the people that I have met and known, there is no person more articulate and more effective than David Harris in raising the central causes for the Jewish community, but also to the broad population. And he's a great geopolitical scientist. His analyses are just right on. And one of the seminal moments was when we were going to introduce Dr. Alisa, the chairman of the CRL, but also the secretary of the Muslim World League. And we had a first meeting when there was a lot of distrust. It was David who came very clearly, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and arranged that fabulous relationship to bloom to what it is today. So David, thank you so much for joining us. For those joining us today, there are going to be a lot of people. Tell us something about David Harris, which nobody knows, a very difficult challenge.
Well, first of all, it's a great pleasure to be with you, my friend, Bawa Jain, and the Center for Responsible Leadership. And I thank you very much for the kind words. I only wish my late mother were still alive and able to hear them. She wouldn't believe me if I were to tell her what you had said. So in terms of this conversation, I was born in the United States to both a mother and a father who were survivors of the Holocaust in Europe. They were fortunate to have survived. They were fortunate to have come to this country. And I always felt blessed living in America because they felt blessed having been given a new home and a new start in America. And that's always been a driving force for me, this appreciation for the gift of American democracy and American opportunity. At the same time, I learned from my parents and every other member of my family, because I'm the very first person born in the United States, that life can be challenging, unexpectedly so. And certainly in their cases, they were all faced with hatred, with discrimination, with persecution, with the threat of genocide. And so they helped me to understand that we need to be vigilant. And I've been blessed, therefore, living in America, to have the opportunity in my lifetime, principally through the American Jewish Committee, to be vigilant and to stand with others in the defense of common values, beginning with the gift of democracy.
Thank you, David. One of the things I want to dive in straight today is, I think the greatest tragedy of the last century was the Holocaust. There is no greater crime on humanity that has been perpetrated to my mind. But yet today, almost 80 years later, anti-Semitism is on the rise like never before. What happened, David? Where did we go wrong?
It's a profound question, Bawa, and I wish there were a simple answer. Frankly, even more, I wish that just as Pfizer found a vaccine for COVID, that Pfizer would have found a vaccine against anti-Semitism, to go further against all forms of hatred. But I think we have to ask another question as well. In the post-war years after the Holocaust, Bawa, after 1945, were we actually living in a new era, a new world, or was it an aberration from the world that had existed not just during the Holocaust, but let's remember, anti-Semitism was not born in Nazi Germany. Anti-Semitism was born nearly 2,000 years ago. Some have defined it as the oldest social hatred and pathology. So these last 80 years or so, were they the exception? And now, in a way, we're returning to that previous pattern of various expressions of anti-Semitism? Or did something really fundamentally change after the Holocaust in human understanding? And will we be able to say that the surge in anti-Semitism today was a brief blip on the screen? I think that's the fundamental question here. And I think all of us who understand that anti-Semitism is a threat to Jews, absolutely. It's a threat to humanity. because it's a slippery slope. It begins with hatred of one group, demonization of one group. Then it spills over to demonization of others, of minorities, of those who are different, who look different, who dress different, who pray different, who act in some way different. So I think we're all in this together. And all of us who are committed to living not just in tolerance. Tolerance to me is a word that should be deleted from the English language. It sets the bar way too low, Bawa. I don't want to tolerate you, Bawa, and I don't want to be tolerated by you. My goal is to respect you, to learn to understand you, to respect you, and one day perhaps to love you. But I'll even go so far as to understand and respect, for starters, and in turn, to count on people like yourself, Bawa, to understand and respect me, and to recognize that out of difference comes strength. Unfortunately, for too many, out of difference comes conflict and fear and resentment. And that's what we're up against. And that's why I think the fight against anti-Semitism is not a Jewish struggle. It's a global struggle of those who believe in coexistence, in humanity, in respect, against those who don't.
Thank you. Thank you for being so clear and candid. I agree with you 200%. I've been claiming in the UN circles since that tolerance was a word which was adopted in 1968 with UNESCO. Come on, we are in 2023, way beyond just trying to tolerate each other. So thank you so much for that. But the other thing you bring out here is, the truth is, it is hatred for the Jews. It's hatred for those who are different from us. Anti-Semitism is a very weak word just to describe all the hatred that is on the rise. So the question is, why has it gone up almost 400% in the last, since 2016? Why?
I think there are several answers potentially, Bawa. Again, there's not one size fits all answer. Number one, let's remember, because of the deep roots of anti-Semitism, when people need a scapegoat, when people need a simple explanation to complicated problems, COVID, for example, all of a sudden you have a global epidemic. You've had millions of people die because of COVID. You've had economies disrupted. You've had people forced to stay home, children away from school. Why did this happen? Well, for some, the answer is not to look into the science of epidemiology. Rather, it's to try and point a finger and find a kind of, quote, satisfying, unquote, explanation. There must be a conspiracy here. And who's behind the conspiracy? Well, the convenient scapegoat, the Jews. Just as for Hitler, going back a century, the Jews were the explanation for why Germany in World War I, the Germany that was so strong militarily and culturally and economically, ultimately lost and was forced to sign the humiliating peace treaty at Versailles. Who stabbed us in the back? And Hitler came along and provided the German people with an easy answer: the Jews. It wasn't Germany itself that made mistakes in entering a war or in ultimately losing a war. No. It was the Jews. And so, again, you see this conspiracy notion. And after all, Bawa, at its heart, anti-Semitism is a conspiracy theory. It's the belief that Jews are singularly demonic, singularly well organized in the shared aim of controlling the world, dominating the economy, ruining the non-Jews. So in a time of crisis, conspiracy theories are ripe. And then we have the fact, Bawa, that the Holocaust, which you speak about so centrally, and I'm so grateful for that, is a receding event. Among young people today, whether in America or elsewhere in the world, for too many, history is uninteresting. History is irrelevant. History means, what did I eat for breakfast this morning? or what film did I see last night? But it's not what happened 80 years ago in some distant lands. Don't bother me with that. Don't bore me with that. And yet, without an understanding of history, as has been said, we may be doomed to repeat it. And the survivors, the eyewitnesses, my mother, my father, the liberators, the righteous Gentiles, all the people involved that bore personal witness are slowly passing away. Who's going to carry the torch, Bawa? And so this is going to recede further and further into history, and of less interest to too many. And the bottom line of the Holocaust, Bawa, to me is, number one, even in what was considered the most scientifically advanced and culturally progressive country in the world, Germany at the time, democracy could be destroyed and the ideology of genocide could be pursued, not by one person, but by a mass of people. That's the first lesson. And the second lesson is that anti-Semitism is a slippery slope. Adolf Hitler gained power in 1933, Bawa. But Auschwitz was not built in 1933. The Auschwitz that you and I saw together in January 2020, together with Dr. Mohammed Alisa, that camp was built years later. Anti-Semitism under the Nazis was a progression. It was a step, a hesitation to see how the world would react. And when the world didn't react, another step and another step. And at the end of the story was Auschwitz, the ultimate symbol of the genocide against the Jewish people. So be vigilant to the early warning. And we have early warnings today. And we know how this story can end because we know the history, at least some of us. And we have to make sure that the history ends very differently this time.
I thank you for bringing up one of the most memorable moments of my life, the visit to Auschwitz in January 2020. And it was all because of you. It was your forthright clarity to Dr. Alisa that if you want to extend a hand of friendship, would you be willing to come on the 75th anniversary of the Holocaust? And to his credit, he was very bold and he brought all the leaders and you all were there together. We all shared that because the truth is also Islamophobia has risen 9,000% since 2001, since 9/11. So there also there's suffering. Look at the crimes against the Asians, which have come up in the last 4 years. So all this hate seems to be becoming systemic in our culture. And you are a very wise man. You've had so much experience. You deal with heads of state and people of all kinds of influence. What can we do? What must be done?
I think your question in a way contained part of the answer. It requires people of the stature and vision and courage of Dr. Mohammed Alisa to take a lead here, which is exactly what he did in January 2020. By agreeing, as you said, to make his very first visit to Auschwitz, the symbol of Nazi genocide, and by inviting more than 60 of his own Muslim colleagues from around the world, most of whom had also never been to Auschwitz, and by the way, some of whom, Bawa, might have even had doubts about the truthfulness of the story. Maybe this was just another Jewish conspiracy to garner sympathy for the Jewish people, or maybe for justifying the creation of the state of Israel. But he led, and he got a lot of criticism in his own world for leading, but he never blinked. And he went and he brought the media with him. Viewers of this video should understand he didn't go in the middle of the night when no one was watching. He went in the bright light of the day, and with him came all the world's major media outlets, from the New York Times to the Associated Press to BBC to Al Arabiya and many, many more. That's the kind of civic leadership that we need in the fight against anti-Semitism, in the fight against all forms of hatred. People to come out of their comfort zone and say this is not a moment for business as usual. We have to come out. We have to take a stand. We have to lead. And yes, we may have to take risks. But silence, history has taught us, will lead us to devastation. And look, again, we're in a world where, for too many, mainstream democracies have failed. Liberal democratic values are no longer in the ascendancy in many countries. Rather, extremes have been fueled. Extremes from the far right, extremes from the far left. People who have slogans but have no solutions. People who believe that social media is the answer to everything. Put up a clever tweet or a clever video on TikTok, and that's all you need. But we have to restore the mainstream of democracies, because in those extreme areas, hatred and anti-Semitism fester. And one thing, Bawa, that I've learned is the far left and the far right are not nearly as far apart as they would like everyone to believe. It's more like a horseshoe. They actually come very close to each other in terms of their intolerance for free speech and differences, and their embrace of various forms of anti-Semitism. So if the mainstream is going to be questioned and doubted by many in democracies, and the extremes are going to surface, they're bringing with them all of this toxic baggage, including, I regret to say, anti-Semitism. Imagine for a moment that Jeremy Corbyn, who led the British Labour Party, had won in the election in which he ran, and he had become the prime minister of a great country, the United Kingdom. Just imagine, with his own anti-Semitism, with his Holocaust denial, with his anti-Zionism, with his embrace of genocidal groups like Hamas and Hezbollah and countries like Iran, that we came this close in a venerable democracy to having someone like that. Or look at some of the others in other democracies, including the United States, who are populating the extremes and trying to use the democratic system to get themselves elected to the Congress and maybe to the White House. Vigilance, vigilance above all, vigilance always at all times.
Is there a real threat to democracy as we know it?
I think the answer is always going to be yes. I don't think that we have to hold the example of Germany and what happened between the Weimar Republic after the First World War until 1933 as the only example, because it may not come in that form, Bawa. We're now aware of what happened in Germany, so we're on the lookout for what happened in Germany. But history doesn't always repeat itself as conveniently as some would wish. There are threats. There are threats to what I would say are our common liberal democratic values. And we need to be extremely vigilant. This is why, for example, I attach so much importance to the European Union. Because if you think for a moment, after the Second World War, in which as many as 65 million people lost their lives, Bawa. I repeat, 65 million. Could anyone have ever imagined that France and Germany, at the heart of this conflict, would join hands in the European Union, would have an open border, a shared common foreign security policy, a shared currency? And for other countries that were once fascist or communist to enter the European Union, they have to go through an admissions process. And the first criterion, democracy. Real democracy, not fake or illiberal, but real democracy. So I hope one day that we will see in other parts of the world variations of the European Union that say we are stronger when we are together. We can manage our differences, but the fundamental core base of our being together is our belief. What's democracy? Democracy is a belief in human dignity, in the rights of the individual, not just the group or the state, the individual. That person's right to freedom of speech and freedom of worship and freedom of association. That's at the core. So is that the Pfizer vaccine against all forms of hatred, including anti-Semitism? Maybe, maybe not, but it's a big step in the right direction, I believe.
I'll also give a shout out to Moderna because they also did the same vaccine, just to be respectful of that. But in my mind, the leader of the free world is the United States of America. We are very blessed to be living here and enjoying all the benefits. But yet, if you look at January 6th, how that was the lowest point in my memory. And yet, even today, people are denying that this was rooted in hatred.
I'll come to that in just a second, but you say that the United States is the leader of the free world, and I completely agree with you. But I've also mentioned the European Union, and I want to mention one other country in this regard too, because as we look to the 21st century, that country, I believe, will increasingly be part of the defense of democracy regionally and globally, and that's India. Which today is the world's second largest country and is projected in a few years to outpace China as the most populous nation on earth, and of course, the largest democracy. And I'm a great believer in the community of democracies. And of course, on a daily basis, there will be differences on trade and investment and regulatory matters and climate change and so forth. I accept that there are differences. That makes life worth living and interesting. But at the end of the day, we have a shared commitment to, as I said, that fundamental respect for human dignity at the core of human rights. So I see a world in the 21st century in which those countries increasingly understand that our fates are intertwined, that we must work more closely together. For years and years after India's emergence in 1947 as a free, independent democracy, relations with the United States were far from perfect. They were challenging. I would add relations between India and Israel were also far from perfect. But in more recent years, things have begun to change dramatically. For the United States, the Quad, together with Japan and Australia, India and the United States, has become an extremely important strategic partnership. And I would argue values partnership. And for India, its relationship with Israel, another democracy, smaller but no less vibrant, has become increasingly important. And then we see variations, Bawa, including the United States, India, the United Arab Emirates, and Israel. So again, to my earlier point about like-minded countries coming together and deepening their relations and their partnership, all of this I see as strategically important, and all of this I see as establishing where like-minded countries are going to stand together. And the events of January 6th in the United States are a very sobering reminder that as strong as American democracy is, as resilient as our institutions have been, every generation faces a challenge. And we were reminded on January the 6th that, again, I used the word more than once, that we need to be vigilant, we need to stand strong. I have faith in American democracy. I have faith in its durability, its resilience, its checks and balances. But we saw what can happen. And now we live in a world where social media has become such a weapon, and in the wrong hands, that weapon can be abused and misused. Imagine for just a moment that Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi chief propagandist, had the access to social media. Imagine that instead of just radio, there wasn't even television at the time. So in addition to radio and in addition to some filmmaking, imagine that Joseph Goebbels, who, by the way, had a PhD in drama, I think in romantic drama, which goes to show you that education is no guarantee against hate. So we now have extremist groups, as we always have, but they have access to the power of social media, which can reach millions and billions. And in a short span, they can incite, they can recruit, they have so much power. And that's what's so worrisome. It's January the 6th, the fragility of democracy, plus the power of social media that makes this a different world than a century ago.
Yeah, no, you're so right. You're so right on this. And I can never forget that day in my life and, how it played out around the world. But I want to recognize and give credit to your leadership. Remember many years ago when we partnered and brought religious leaders of the Asian countries to Israel. I remember the last meeting in the cabinet room with Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu at that time. And he came to me, he says, can you request Prime Minister Modi to visit Israel? That time he had not. And after that meeting, through the religious leaders, Modi went to Israel, look at the relationship. You slightly recognize the growing influence of India and the world's largest democracy. Plus also all your efforts in paving the way for the Abrahamic Accords. You've been doing this for a number of years. So I want to recognize and applaud all that you did. Many times it goes unrecognized, but who cares, right? We want to get things done, right? That's ultimately your motivation. I know that all too well. For me is, okay, now we are at this point. You are talking about leaders being mobilized. How do we filter that down to the common person that becomes a global movement against this epidemic of hate?
Well, I come back for a moment, Bawa, to our mutual friend, Mohammed Alisa. Not only, as I said, did he go to Auschwitz himself, not only did he invite more than 60 Muslim religious leaders to join him, not only did he invite the press to make sure that the whole world knew that they were going to be in Auschwitz, but when he returned to Saudi Arabia, what did he do? He convened Muslim religious leaders. Was it 1,500 or so?
1,200 of the senior most muftis who came together in Jeddah and signed the Charter of Makkah.
There you go. So 1,200 religious leaders who came and who signed the charter. And what were the elements of the charter? Were they about fanning the flames of religious hatred? Or were they about promoting the values of understanding and coexistence? So not all of us have the reach of a Muhammad al-Isa as the head of the Muslim World League. But each of us, Bawa, each of us, in ways big and small, have the power to do something. And I believe in the late Robert Kennedy had visited South Africa, and he spoke about the ripple effect. If you throw a pebble or a stone into a lake, it creates a ripple effect. Each of us can do something to make this world a better place, a more respectful place, to fight the extremists. And Bawa, I know something else, again, from personal experience. Not every righteous person during the Holocaust was a famous person. Not every righteous person was a leader with millions of people following him or her. In fact, there were too few leaders who showed the courage and the humanity. But there were many people who were completely out of the limelight, who had no position of authority. They just understood instinctively because of the family in which they grew up, because of the house of worship in which they had spent time. They understood instinctively that something was wrong, that their neighbors were being arrested and deported for no reason other than the fact that they were Jews. That children, 1 month old, 3 months old, a year old, were being arrested and deported and exterminated simply for being Jews, and in a variety of ways. And each story is its own history, Balwa. These people, again, without any titles, without any high degrees from elite universities, they just acted because it was the right thing to do. So when you ask the question, what can be done? Each of us can do something. None of us can use the excuse that we don't have all the degrees or titles. But then again, those who do have the degrees and titles are not exempted. Where are they? Are they speaking up? Are they standing shoulder to shoulder with their Jewish brothers and sisters, or their Muslim brothers and sisters, or others who are targeted? And I think at the end of the day, there's a kind of personal accounting. And history will be kind to those who stood up and spoke out. And history will be very unkind to those who come from the excuse factories. I would have, but I couldn't because. No, there are no excuses. In the Second World War, people argue they didn't know. Maybe in a few cases they did, in many cases they did. But today, with all the tools of communication and information and dissemination, Bawa, who can claim that they don't know? We all know. We know when the Rohingya are expelled from Myanmar. We know when Xinjiang province in China is targeted because of its Muslim majority. We know when a black church in Charleston, South Carolina, is the target of a white racist who kills 9 African-American worshipers who welcomed him into their midst. We know when 11 Jews praying in the Shabbat service in Pittsburgh are murdered by a white racist. We know when 2 mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand are attacked. We know when Iranian women are fighting for their basic fundamental human rights, and women under Taliban rule in Afghanistan are even denied a basic education. We know. What will we do with the information?
Wow, that was so powerful. You enumerated so many examples from around the world. One part which we are faced with right now is the war between Russia and Ukraine, where the Russian president has openly said that it's a fight against Nazism on the Ukrainian side. Tell us what's happening there.
Well, in a word, rubbish. Vladimir Putin chose to justify this barbaric, illegal, unprovoked invasion of neighboring Ukraine by suggesting that it was a matter of denazification, his word. And I asked the question, Bawa, denazification? First of all, Ukraine is led by a democratically elected, popularly elected president, Volodymyr Zelensky, who's Jewish. And the whole country knew he was Jewish when they voted for him. So the idea of denazifying a country led by an openly Jewish president, elected by the people of Ukraine, absurd. Moreover, I happen to believe, I've said this before, that we have a problem of denazification, but it's not in Ukraine, Bawa, it's in Russia. Now, this is a tricky one because Russia was one of the key allies in defeating the Nazis in 1945. No question about it. But Putin today is utilizing Nazi techniques. Blitzkrieg, Anschluss, stormtroopers, war crimes, genocide, arrests and deportations. forcing a mass exodus, and then coming up with phony grievances, fake history. These are all Nazi techniques from Germany. The notion that somehow Poland threatened Germany, Czechoslovakia threatened Germany, ridiculous. This was all simply a way of putting a veneer on the aggression of Nazi Germany and now of Russia. So what worries me today is that we're in the second year of this valiant Ukrainian struggle, but some in the United States, Bawa, you see it, some in Europe and elsewhere are asking, why do we continue to support Ukraine? Why do we continue to send money? Why do we continue to send weapons? This is not our war. Well, I think it's incumbent upon our political leaders, and I would say of both major parties in the United States as well as in Europe, to help the American people and others understand why, yes, this is our war. We have a stake in its outcome. This is about Ukraine, absolutely. It's about its territorial integrity, yes. It's about our collective security. And it's about our credibility, Bawa. In 1994, I think most people don't know this or have forgotten it, we, the United States, urged Ukraine to remove all of its nuclear weapons inherited from the Soviet Union in exchange for a guarantee of their sovereignty and territorial integrity. It was called the Budapest Memorandum. President Clinton, on behalf of the United States, agreed to that. So Ukraine gave up all of the nuclear weapons. Think for a moment, had they kept the nuclear weapons, would Russia have invaded in 2022? I'm not so sure they would have invaded. They would have thought twice and three times. So we, the United States, gave a solemn guarantee. And then think back to the period leading up to the Second World War. Think back to the America First movement, which was founded by students from Yale University in 1940 and joined by people like Charles Lindbergh and others who said, stay out of Europe, don't get entangled, don't support Britain. We can live even if Germany wins. Fortunately, they were in the minority and they were ultimately disbanded. But this isolationist instinct has always been around, and we have to make sure that it doesn't prevail. And I worry with each passing day of the war in Ukraine, and God bless the Ukrainians for the way in which they're fighting, that more people will start asking these questions, and our political leaders need to be responsible. And as we enter into a presidential election cycle, that they don't give in to those screaming the loudest, but they act responsibly. That's a tall order in American politics. But right now we need tall-minded politicians.
Now, thank you for reminding everybody that we need more responsible leadership in Washington. We surely, there's sorely lack it right now. Our Congress has been divided as never before, and the whole world is watching. I mean, you outlined so articulately the facts of Russia and Ukraine, right? I want to go back to what you said earlier, and I totally agree with you on the bold decision by Dr. Muhammad Alisa to visit Auschwitz. It came at a very critical time, and as you well know, he faced a lot of threats. But he took that step boldly, and actually now if you look back, all the people around him regard that as a seminal moment for Dr. Alisa's evolution to a global leader that he's become now. They said it was post-Auschwitz and pre-Auschwitz as a defining line of how he's now received around the world. So this should be a great example for anybody having any kind of doubts about the Holocaust or anti-Semitism or hatred for the Jews, that befriending Jews, building bridges is constructive. It is the right thing to do.
Well, two things. Firstly, I will never forget that day. I had been to Auschwitz many times before, but in this case, it was to accompany Dr. Alisa and his delegation, including, of course, you. And there was one moment in particular which I have to share with your viewers. For those who have not visited Auschwitz, it's a very powerful, not just place, but museum. And among the exhibits in the museum are collections of human hair of the victims, collections of children's shoes, of eyeglasses, of suitcases for the Jews thinking they were being taken to a labor camp rather than to a death camp, of prosthetics. Very simple things, but thousands and thousands of eyeglasses and thousands of shoes. And Dr. Alisa and I were standing together in front of the shoes, the children's shoes. These threadbare shoes, we're not talking here about fancy shoes, not at all, to the contrary. And he was just staring. And at a certain moment, he grabbed, with his right hand, he grabbed my left hand. And he held my hand. And I could feel the emotion going through his body, through his arm and hand into my body. And I have no doubt that at that moment, he was also thinking of his own children, as I was thinking of my own children, that those children could have been yours, mine, others. And the sheer enormity of it, the industrialization of genocide, this entirely new alphabet that was created by Nazi Germany to exterminate the Jewish people, from A for Auschwitz to Z for Zyklon B, the gas that was used in the gas chambers to kill Jews in larger and larger numbers before putting them in the crematoria. A very, very powerful day, and to see it through his eyes and your eyes. And Bawa, I also want to say that you yourself have been and continue to be, and I know you're stubborn on this, and thankfully so, and will always be, this pillar who stands for what's right, whether it's popular or not, whether it gets you plaudits or not. You understand that our world can only survive, much less thrive, if we all learn to live with one another, respect one another, make space for one another, defend one another, protect one another. That's our world. Your beliefs, Bawa, that inspired you in your faith are different than my beliefs in practice, in ritual, but at the end of the day, they're the same. Whatever your religion is called, whatever my religion is called, what do we want? We want the same thing. We want peace. We want respect. We want understanding. We want cooperation. We want coexistence. And we want to make room for one another. So you're a Jain and I'm a Jew. Dr. Mohammed Al-Isa is a Muslim. And we have many Christians who I'm sure are watching, and Buddhists, and how many other religions, and people of no particular religion. But everyone, and that's my appeal, everyone who cares about the future of our world, the world that our children, and now my grandchildren as well, as I get up in age, will inherit, we have to join this cause. And the cause is very simple, at least in theory. Is to stand up for each other, with each other, alongside each other, irrespective of our backgrounds, because of our backgrounds, and stand up to those who would divide us, and stand up to those who would foment hate and distrust, and peddle conspiracy theories, and ultimately build the gas chambers and the crematoria that we saw together in January of 2020 at Auschwitz. That's what we're up against. And we dare not, if I may borrow from Winston Churchill, I think in his speech in 1955, we dare not weary, we dare not flinch, and we dare not despair. No, we dare not weary, we dare not flinch, and we dare not despair. The future of the world depends on whether the good people of all religions and no religion stand together as one against those who would divide and seek to destroy us.
That was very powerful to remember Winston Churchill at that moment. Credit goes to the trust that Dr. Alisa had in me and the trust he built in you, that despite all the challenges and the obstacles, he made that bold decision to go to Auschwitz, and it has affected him deeply. He did not know till that time that Muslims too were persecuted, were targets of the Holocaust. He did not know that. You educated him on that, and he has since become a dear friend of the Jewish people. If you see, every major Jewish leader today wants to and is meeting Dr. Alisa, and that was paved by you, my friend. You were the conduit for that. And similarly, now we want to reach out to all the others, that there is no room in the world for hate. And your testimony today, I call it a testimony because of your experience, is going to pave a powerful way. So as we come to a close, I just want to ask you, you've already articulated so well, is there 3 things that we should be mindful of and can and must do?
Let me, if I may, end with a story, a real story. Whether it has 3 elements or 2, you'll decide, Bawa. In the 1990s, there was a man named Milosevic. And Milosevic was the leader of Serbia. And he was very anti-Muslim. And he wanted to control Kosovo. And he launched a campaign of ethnic cleansing to drive out the population, which was overwhelmingly Muslim, so that Serbia could fully control what it believed was the historic heartland of the Serbian nation. And I, as a Jew, watched what happened and could not remain silent. And with my colleagues at the American Jewish Committee, we immediately traveled to the refugee camps to which the people of Kosovo had been driven in Macedonia, in Albania, in Montenegro, and elsewhere. And after we saw 2 camps, refugee camps in Macedonia, we were particularly struck by the fact that one was run by the German military, together with a German NGO, a Protestant NGO, Die Johanniter. And when we left the camp and asked ourselves, okay, is that it? Is this kind of condolence tourism? We go, we shed a tear, we take a picture, we pat the child on the head and say everything will be okay. No, that's not enough. What do we do next? And we came up with the idea that we would fly to Germany and we would ask the Germans whether we could partner together. We Jews and they Germans, 50 years after the Holocaust, to bring additional help to the Muslim refugees of Milosevic and his Serbian forces. And we flew to Germany. The capital was still in Bonn, not yet Berlin. And we met with the top leadership, and they immediately, to their credit, embraced the idea. So for me, the ultimate example was Jews, including myself, the child of 2 Holocaust survivors, and Germans in uniform, Bawa, in uniform, joined together, raising several $1 million, purchasing tents and blankets and medical equipment and toys for the children, and bringing them to the Muslim refugees driven out of their land. This was our way of saying, as Jews and Germans, history can move forward. Doesn't do it by itself. It takes people to intervene, to dream, to move ahead. Each of us, on levels big and small, can do something to combat hate and to express our common humanity. Not tomorrow, not the day after, The time is now, right now. Tomorrow is too late.
All it needs is some chutzpah. We know that all too well. But I have to ask you this, especially as we mentioned the election cycle. What would you tell our lawmakers in Washington on this subject? What can and should they be doing?
America is not just a nation. America is an idea. It's a revolutionary idea. We Americans are not drawn together by common blood or common religion. We're drawn together by a common idea. And that revolutionary idea is respect for human dignity, protection of human dignity, human rights. We, America, must lead. And in leading, we must always set the example. Because at the end of the day, the American experiment is a work in progress. We've made enormous strides. We're not quite there. So on the one hand, we need to be the world leader in defending freedom and human dignity. And we know that Russia and China and Iran and North Korea and others challenge us. And on the other hand, and we are big enough to do both, Bawa, as we lead the world, we need to continue to set the example. And where we fall short, and we have fallen short, and both parties, political parties, have fallen short at times, we need to do better. Not by pointing the finger at the other party, but by asking ourselves, what can we do better within our own party? That's the more mature, responsible politics, rather than this kind of finger-pointing, zero-sum politics we have in America today. It's not serious. It's distracting. It's paralyzing. We need to restore the idea of America, our unity on the global stage, and our strength at home. And we have a ways to go.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Now you all know why we wanted David Harris. I mean, I am so inspired and motivated. I hope every one of you too is. And remember, take David's words to heart. Each one of us can make a difference. Commit. Do not hesitate. Thank you so much, David. Thank you. This has been just the most wonderful conversation.